It's time to cook with Susan Beck. I'm here today peeling potatoes because I am going to make scalloped potatoes and Polish Kielbasa. Polish Kielbasa is the meat that my family prefers over the traditional ham in scalloped potatoes. Now, we use ham a lot of times when after Easter or Christmas or some big dinner where we have some leftover ham, then we often make our scalloped potatoes with ham. But otherwise, we tend to use a Polish kielbasa, kind of like a ring bologna. I've got this one split open here, and we will be slicing that up in our scalloped potatoes today. I also have 10 small to medium-sized red potatoes here. The kind of potatoes you use is really your own personal preference, and I make this with both the more baking potatoes and these nice red potatoes. Either one is just fine. We will be slicing these up today to put into our scalloped potatoes. And I recently learned that the word scallop comes from the Old English word callop, and that means to slice thinly. So I guess that's a very fitting name. Now, I mentioned that we're going to slice these thinly. We want these to be fairly thin. They'll cook a lot quicker. As it is, I find that this dish takes about an hour and a half in a 400-degree oven. I really like my potatoes cooked well through, and I just really don't care for any crunch left to them. So that is an important step in my opinion. I get the oven going as soon as I get started on making my potatoes and meat slices, as well as the roux or the white sauce that we're going to be making today. Okay, next step is going to be that I want to give these a little bit of a rinse, and then I am going to slice in my food processor today. Okay, the last of the potatoes have been rinsed. We'll set our peels off to the side. Another note, you could leave the peels on the scalloped potatoes. I used to try to do that, but my kids just don't go for that as much, so I tend to peel them. But they always say a lot of the nutrients are in the skins and the peels of these vegetables. All right, so you could hand slice these, that's not a problem. If you do, I strongly urge you to try to make sure they're all the same thickness, because you want them to not only cook quickly by being thin, you want them to cook evenly, where you don't have some of them that are really done and some are still quite crunchy. And that is the reason why I like my food processor for this job, because everything might not be super thin with my food processor, but they are all at the same thickness. And that's probably a reason why it also takes me about an hour and a half to cook this dish, is because they are probably a little thicker than if I was to cut them by hand carefully. All right, so I'm using my slicing attachment in my food processor. Down that will go. Should go, there we go. And then into the top, I will be placing my potatoes. I can probably get 3 of those smaller ones in at a time. And latch that down and add a few more to this. Now, au gratin potatoes would be the same idea, except instead of a white sauce, we would use a cheese sauce. Au gratin means to have cheese in something. So you could do the same recipe, leave out the meat, and make your cheesy roux by adding some cheese to your white sauce that we're going to make next. All right, the potatoes are all nicely sliced there. I do like to grease the casserole dish that I'm going to be using for this recipe. So I'm just going to give that a spray for a little bit easier cleanup. And then I like to put half of the potatoes in the bottom of my casserole dish. So I'm just going to take approximately half of those and place them in the bottom. This is a dish. I left my salt and pepper by the stove. We'll be using that again in a second. I do like to salt my potatoes fairly liberally, and also give it a good crank of freshly ground pepper. I really like freshly ground pepper. It's just a little bit more noticeable, and pepper is one of my favorite seasonings. So if you don't have a pepper grinder, you might like to get one of those. All right, we'll pause there with the potatoes, and we're going to move on to that Polish Kielbasa. This could just be cut into rings, and placed in on top of the potatoes. But I like to have meat in every bite, so I like to take my Polish kielbasa and slice it into half the long way, so that now I have semicircles instead of full circles. So we'll do the same with the other piece of this. This is a 1 pound piece of Polish kielbasa, and it's actually plenty of meat for this size of a container of potatoes. Again, when I use ham, I usually just use whatever I happen to have left over from a previous dinner. So we'll slice up these pieces of meat and place them into the casserole dish. And we'll do the same with the, oops, there's a piece I missed. Same with the other half. They're also a little more bite-sized when you use a semicircle instead of the full circle of the meat. Alright, one more slice, and in those go. So as you can see there, I have plenty of meat covering my potatoes. Onto that casserole dish goes the rest of our sliced potatoes. This is just another one of those just hearty, home-cooked meals that are so tasty, and you just don't ever get this type of thing in a restaurant. Again, I like to add a little more pepper and a little more salt. I'm fairly generous with it. I think the potatoes can really use that. Next step is to move over to the stove. We will be making our roux on the top of the stove. A roux is a thickening compound made with some type of fat. Today I am using butter, but that fat could be a vegetable oil, it could be margarine, it could be bacon fat, lard, it could be any type of oily ingredient that you would like to use. And then you combine that, let's get my burner going here, we want to melt that butter, and combine it with some type of starch. So I use cornstarch a lot when I'm making gravy, which has a white sauce base. I'm going to use flour today. You can also use tapioca. I use that in my grandma's oven stew. I'll post the link to that down below where I've used tapioca in that. You could use a different kind of flour. I want to get my butter melted before I put this in. The other thing about a roux is that you usually use it in equal proportions. So I had 3 tablespoons of butter that I'm melting, so I will be putting in 3 tablespoons of flour. Now, anybody who wants to learn to cook, this would be a basic thing to learn to do. A roux is used in many, many different things. So I mentioned my grandmother's stew. If you make any mac and cheese, I'll post my link below for my previous video on pepper jack mac and cheese, but that is another case where you need to make this little white sauce and then you stir the cheese into it like you would if you wanted to make au gratin potatoes instead of scalloped potatoes with Polish Kielbasa or with ham. Alright, so I've added that in and I'm now just stirring, and that gets fairly thick, but as we slowly add our milk, we will get that to a nice white liquid. Soups and chowders, that would be another place where you would use a roux. Now I want to leave this kind of cook just a little bit and let my flour work into that butter a little bit, and then I'm going to be slowly adding the milk. We'll get a close-up of that. Alright, this is just some little, like, almost clumpy here, but we're going to turn that back into a nice, smooth sauce by slowly adding in our milk. I'm just going to put in the tiniest bit there to start with. And I'm going to use a whisk as my tool for this. And it's already getting a little bit creamier, but it's still quite thick, and I do want to get it back to more of a liquid than a solid. I am using 1% milk today. That's what my family drinks. You can use whatever you have in your house. Of course, the richer the milk, the richer the cream sauce will be. All right, here we have it. It's a nice thick paste. Add a more there. I've probably got about 1 cup of my 2 1/4 cups milk mixed in. I want to do this slowly. I do not want lumps, so I'm trying to work with my whisk all of that together. If I was to put my flour into the liquid without putting it into the butter first, and if I did this really quickly, I would end up with a very lumpy roux. Like I said, this is something that with practice you'll get better at, but it is very useful in many, many different recipes. Alright, it's looking quite good in the fact that I don't have any lumps. It's very runny right now though, so bringing it back to a low boil or a strong simmer will help it to thicken up again. So I'm going to take it from that medium-low heat and turn it up to maybe even a little higher than medium, just to get that going. I'm ready to add the rest of it in there, I think. Also at this time I do like to put a little salt in my roux as well as a little more fresh ground pepper. That's up to you and your taste. About a minute has gone by. I've just been stirring it now and then, and I'm starting to get some bubbles on the edge. I want to get this to a nice low boil here, and that will allow it to thicken back up. Alright, it's been about another minute with me just stirring every once in a while, and you can see that this is just much, much thicker. Maybe if I use my spatula, we can see that it's not quite as runny as milk anymore, and it's ready to go on our potatoes. That boil just quickly causes it to thicken right up. Alright, last step before it goes into the oven is to simply pour the white sauce across all of your potatoes and your Polish Kielbasa. Use this rubber spatula so I get all that goodness. Oh, the white sauce is what makes scalloped potatoes so tasty. And a very simple seasoning with this. I just simply limit it to salt and pepper. Now when I cook this, I do like to put a lid on it for the first 45 minutes, followed by 45 minutes with the lid off. We'll have a look at this in an hour and a half. Here's our finished scalloped potatoes with Polish Kielbasa. Look at that. This is one piping hot dish when it comes out of the oven. I mean, the steam is just rising, rising, rising off of that. This is a meal that we always serve up on our plates before we pray. Maybe it'll cool down enough to actually taste all the flavors in there. Now, I just really like the Polish Kielbasa. I don't know, ham just seems so bland to me after having made it this way. I'm serving it today with a Cheddar Bay biscuit, which you can find the recipe for these posted on my YouTube channel. These are a knockoff of the Red Lobster biscuits. My family's favorite with this is corn. Just like with tuna noodle casserole, they always want peas. With scalloped potatoes, they always want corn. And I've got a little cutie orange on there too, just to make it a well-balanced meal. Potatoes are cooked through. To me, that's one of the most important things. I can taste the salt and pepper. Anytime you can season as you cook, and instead of having it on the table, I think it just tastes better and the flavor is more throughout the entire dish. Enjoy this new twist on a traditional dish, Polish Kielbasa and scalloped potatoes. I'll post the recipe for this as well as the links to all the other great recipes that I referenced throughout this video in the description below. And if you like this recipe or any of the others, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Time to Cook with Susan Beck.